This video is about the SCUBA unit. We're going to talk about how to assemble the SCUBA unit and the different components with a SCUBA unit and a couple hazards associated while handling a SCUBA unit. Remember, a SCUBA unit is life support equipment that people use to survive in an atmosphere that they're not used to breathing. So it's very important that you understand and exercise a routine so that you do it correctly the same time every time. This is the SCUBA cylinder. The SCUBA cylinder stores compressed gas for the diver to breathe during the dive. There's 3,000 pounds per square inch of air or gas packed into this cylinder, so there's a lot of stored potential energy. If this valve were to come off somehow, like if the valve or the tank would fall over and snap the valve off, all that potential energy would be released all at the same time, causing this to become a projectile and it could hurt people. So when it's unattended, we're going to make sure that we lie it down on its side so it can't fall over on its own. The cylinder wall and the crown are made of aluminum in this specific tank, and that holds back all the high pressure air, and it's the structure of the tank itself. The boot on the bottom prevents any surfaces that the tank is around from getting damaged. It also allows the tank to stand up a little easier. The valve on the top consists of 3 different parts. The burst disc on the side is an overpressure protection device that will fail first if this cylinder is overpressurized. That way the tank doesn't fail and explode. The burst disc will fail first and relieve all the pressure when the operator is filling it. The valve is what allows the air to enter or leave and enter the tank itself. To open the valve, you will go clockwise. To shut the valve, you will go counterclockwise. Finally, the seating surface for the tank is right here. This is where the regulator will meet with the tank valve itself. There's an O-ring that makes that seal. You have to ensure that that O-ring is present and it's in good condition. On the cylinder walls, there is a visual inspection sticker that is required to be done once a year. So the visual inspection will be completed once a year in the United States. The sticker will be placed on the cylinder walls to show the operator or the fill station operator that the cylinder has been inspected and is safe to fill. The next piece of gear we're going to talk about is the buoyancy compensation device. There are 2 functions the buoyancy compensation device serves. The first function is to provide a means to connect the BC to the SCUBA cylinder so that the SCUBA cylinder has a nice secure fit to the diver. The second means is to provide a means for air to enter into your buoyancy compensation device to compensate for any additional weight you may be carrying. Note that is not called the buoyancy control device because you do not use it to control your buoyancy. Use it to compensate for any additional weight you may be carrying. Right. The different straps associated with the buoyancy compensation device, also known as the BCD, right, are the cummerbund, which goes around the navel, the cummerbund buckle, which holds the cummerbund in place, the shoulder straps, which provide a nice tight snug fit around the shoulders and so that it doesn't shift around the neck and off the shoulders, and then the chest strap, which is going to prevent it from, again, shifting back and forth. The back has 2 straps. The top strap is used to set the vertical height on the cylinder. If the strap is too long, the BCD will sit too low on the tank. Every time you look up, you're going to hit your head on the regulator. If it's too short, the BCD is going to sit very high on the tank, and every time you kick, you might kick the bottom of the tank, and it'll be annoying, and you have a higher likelihood of it falling out of the buoyancy compensation device. Down here you have the cam strap. The cam strap function is to affix the buoyancy compensation device to this cylinder. Finally, you have 4 ways to vent air out of this buoyancy compensation device. We'll talk about these in detail in another video. You have 2 top dumps up at the shoulders called your shoulder dumps. You have 1 along the bottom, which is called the bottom dump. And then you have one on your low pressure inflator manifold, which is this gray button, which will allow you to vent. We'll talk about the low pressure inflator in another video. The next piece of equipment we're going to talk about is the regulator assembly. There are multiple components of the regulator assembly, and we're going to talk about each one a little bit. The first component is the first stage regulator, also known as the high pressure regulator. Its function is to take the high pressure in the tank and reduce it to an intermediate pressure to be used by the different surfaces by your SCUBA unit. It contains the regulator itself and a yoke and a yoke screw. The yoke and the yoke screw work together to connect the regulator to the tank. The first surface I'm going to talk about is your low pressure inflator hose. The purpose of the low pressure inflator hose is to connect your low pressure inflator to provide air for your buoyancy compensation device when needed. Over here, I have two second stage regulators. I have a primary second stage regulator. I have an alternate second stage regulator. They have the similar function to provide air on demand to the diver or a diver's buddy in the event of an emergency. Finally, we have a high pressure hose connected to a submersible pressure gauge, also known as an SPG. This is the only high pressure hose you have on the regulator, and it provides indication of the pressure in your tank. All right, now we're going to start assembling our SCUBA unit. The first thing we're going to do is inspect our SCUBA cylinder to make sure it's safe to use. All right, we're going to remove the dust cap, and we're going to check to make sure that the O-ring is in place and that it is in good condition. We're going to stand the cylinder upright with the valve pointing to the right and the opening facing away from you. Next, we're going to take the BCD and attach it to the tank. Remember, the tank valve is facing to your right and the opening is facing away from you. The O-ring is away from you. We're going to take the valve strap and we're going to drape it around the valve so that the O-ring is facing the middle of this handle right here. Remember, the valve strap adjusts the height that the BCD sits on the tank. Next, we're going to take the cam strap and we're going to take the D-ring and work it into the cam. And then holding the tank and grabbing the cam, we're going to pull the cam toward me, just like that, so that it's tight. Now that it is attached to the tank, I'm going to move my feet out of the way, and I'm going to pick up the BCD with that handle and give it a couple tugs to make sure that it doesn't slip out of the bottom of the tank. Next, I'm going to install the regulator assembly. Orientation of the regulator assembly is very important, and some tips to help you orient it correctly are as follows. First, I want to take the yoke and the yoke screw and point it toward my body. I also want to ensure that the valve opening is pointing away from me and the valve handle is pointing to the right. With the yoke pointing toward me, I'm going to rotate it so that my two second stage hoses for my second stage regulators are in my right hand, just like this. Then I'm going to loosen the yoke screw enough just to pop that little cover off. I'm going to inspect the seating surface of the regulator. It's a raised lip that meets the O-ring on the tank, and also inspect the tank O-ring. Now I'm going to meet that raised surface to the O-ring and tighten the yoke screw just enough so that it is finger tight, just like that. Notice I can still rotate the regulator back and forth. I want to set it up so that my hoses make an X. Next, I'm going to locate my first stage regulator. I'm going to put it in front of the BCD so it's out of the way. I'm going to locate my alternate second stage regulator, and I'm going to hook that into and stow that in this little octo holder, just like this, so that you can pull it very easily and remove it in an emergency. That's located at the upper D-ring of your right pocket. Next, I'm going to locate my high pressure hose with the submersible pressure gauge, and I'm going to hook it onto the upper D-ring of my left hand pocket. Next, I'm going to install my low pressure inflator hose to my low pressure inflator. These can be a little tricky. to operate, I'm going to take my pinky, middle, and ring fingers and grasp the hose. With my thumb and index finger, I'm going to cycle, move up and down the connect fitting, so like that. Okay. While I'm holding it down, I'm going to meet the quick disconnect pieces just enough so that it stays down, and then I'm going to push them together, and I hear a click. I give it a good tug to make sure that it is connected. If you try to do that with the unit pressurized, it's a lot harder. You can do it, but it's not as easy as I just showed you now. Okay, I also want you to notice how I have everything stowed. There's nothing except for this that's not attached to my BCD, and this isn't attached to my BCD because it's going to be in my mouth. Right? It's important that you keep everything stowed so that you don't damage your gear, and you don't get hung up on coral and break it, and you don't disturb the bottom. Next, I'm going to pressurize the SCUBA unit. Right? One safety concern is the orientation of this submersible pressure gauge. If it's ever going to fail, it's going to fail catastrophically, and it can shoot debris and glass in the direction that it is facing. So I don't want it to be facing at me so I don't get hurt, or anybody else so that they don't get hurt. So a good direction to face it is up against the BCD pocket, so that if it does fail, it fails into the BCD and not towards somebody that it could hurt. Okay. Next, I'm going to prepare to pressurize it by grabbing the valve handle, and I'm going to get ready to turn it toward me. But before I do that, I'm going to make sure my face is kind of away from all the regulator unit stuff, so that if it does fail, if it leaks, it doesn't blow out an eardrum or injure me in any way. Okay, so then I'm going to initially pressurize it by just cracking it open, and when I do, you might hear a little hiss, and you're going to hear the air start flowing from the tank into the regulator, and all the hoses are going to get stiff. When you hear the airflow stop moving, then you know it's fully pressurized. It looks like this. A little puff and a hiss, and everything stopped, and all my hoses are a little stiffer than they once were. So now I'm kind of listening to this area to make sure I don't have any leaks. So now after I do all that, I'm going to fully open the valve until it stops on the back seat. And now your unit is fully pressurized and ready to test. Next, I'm going to check the functionality of my SCUBA unit. I'm going to start with my low pressure inflator. I'm going to ensure that I can move air from my BCD to my SCUBA unit by depressing and releasing the red inflate button like this. Notice I didn't have to press very long or hard, just quick little taps, and I listen for air to move from my tank to my BCD. Next, I'm going to locate my submersible pressure gauge and one of my second stage regulators. I'm going to purge it by pressing the purge button while watching pressure on my gauge. Now, I do this because I want to check to see if my valve is fully open. If I press the regulator and watch my pressure gauge and nothing changes on my pressure gauge, then I know my valve is fully open. If it drops, that means my valve is either cracked open if it drops and bounces up, or fully shut if it drops and it stays down. All right, one more thing, sometimes these will free flow when I press the button. If it does free flow, it's just going to keep spitting air out. In that case, I'm going to take my finger, I'm going to put it in the mouthpiece hole. It looks like this. All right, you can notice that when I press the regulator, it free flowed, and while I was watching my submersible pressure gauge, I saw no pressure drop, so now I know that my valve is fully open. I'm going to repeat the process with my other second stage regulator like this. Okay, you can notice that that one free flowed too, and similar to the first time, I put my finger in the second stage regulator and it stopped the free flow, and I still had no pressure drop on my submersible pressure gauge. Now I know everything on my BCD works fine, and I'm ready to get it in the water.